Greetings everyone, hello and welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday. How are we all doing? I had a momentary panic just before stream there because I opened my book and all my bookmarks fell out. So thankfully they are now back in the book, so I know where I am. Yes. Did have a minor panic when I just accidentally just knocked them all out. I was like, no! But yes, you are ready for it to be Friday. One of those weeks, eh? Fun. Yeah. I don't know, this week's felt a bit kind of like, I don't know. Like every day is the same day, almost. I don't know, I don't really know how to describe it, but yeah. Well, I hope your week either gets better or goes quickly. Those are the two things that I can wish for you. Excuse me. I may be still clearing my throat a little bit because there is still like tiny little remains of this flipping cold. It is a tenacious one. It has stuck around, so I still find myself clearing my throat, which is very annoying, turns out. But yes. Oh no. Ooh. Betting it's a COVID mutation. It could have been, I guess, but it felt very much like a cold. Any sexy Draculas in this one? Sadly not. I guess we've possibly got the possibility of sexy priests, but we don't know yet. We've got creepy. What was he? Chaplain? I'm not sure. Any sexy Frankensteins? Sadly not. I mean, they could be Frankenstein's monsters if they wanted to, I guess. Also, hi, Shitehawk. Welcome in. Hope you're doing well. And yes, sorry if I jump scared anyone by updating the follower goal, because we've reached our follower goal. Hello, hooray, that one. We have reached 300 followers on Twitch. Boop, 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 boop. Which is not bad, not half bad. So I've upped it by just 100. Yeah, didn't want to be too ambitious, so it's now at 400. The text does never specify these characters as human. That is true. Also, hello Parola, welcome in. Wow, I can't words today. This is doing well. Just finished watching the movie Victor Frankenstein. Nice. If you want to imagine them as all monsters, cryptids, nothing saying you can't. This is very true. What is your trumpet question, Shitehawk? Fire away. Is it a sensible one or is it a silly one? I will answer it either way. I love that, and I'm now going to be using that as the term for when. So, the pictures I put on Instagram. Oh, Thunder! Well, thank you for being here, and much love back to you. Thank you very much indeed for resubscribing. Welcome in. Yeah, so for reference, I recently got some new professional pictures done, because I was way overdue a new set, and I took some with my new and shiny double bell trumpet, which is an instrument that is used quite a lot in contemporary weird and wacky experimental music. I think there are probably fewer than 100 in the world. Not very many people have them, but the fun thing that you can do with it is so the bell usually points in the same direction as the normal trumpet bell, but the fun thing you can do with it is you can flip it round so it points over your shoulder, so you can get like a cool, like if you're like pointing at a wall or something, if your back is to a wall or something, you get like a cool echo effect. It's great fun. But yeah, that's what that is, and Shitehawk has now christened it the exhaust trumpet, which I really like. That's actually a fantastic term. So yeah, that's what that is. Double Dooter. Yeah. Favourite weekly internet segment. Also, hello Lady Mephistopheles. And Thunder, you do not need to apologise. It was a lovely message. You have a bad cold? Oh no, I had a bad cold a couple of weeks ago. Hope it's not that awful. That sucks. Yeah, I hope you feel better soon. But yeah, curiosity quenched. I am glad. It is a very silly instrument, and as I say, not many people have it, but composers love it because it does sort of add a whole new range of interesting effects and sounds that you can do on the trumpet. And it's just frankly convenient because you don't need to take a mute out, put it down, or put another one in or whatever. You can just have one in one bell and either one in the other or nothing. It's very exciting. Hello, small cog. Good time zone to you. Hope you're well. Also, mentioning jigsaw, Parola, I got a jigsaw for my birthday courtesy of Sam's parents, and there are 5 more pieces to do. I was just finishing it, and then I looked at the time and was like, oh, I need to start stream soon. So yes, I have been doing that. It's a classic 1,000-piece jigsaw of cities of Europe, and it's really good. It's a really nice jigsaw, actually. Happy belated birthday. Oh, thank you. Yes, it was my birthday on Sunday. Yes, Sunday. And I spent most of it in the car driving. It was very exciting. Jigsaw last week. Little fella on a bike has not stopped bothering you since. Nice. Fun. It's so hard to stop puzzling. It's addictive. It is genuinely addictive. It is very dangerous. And I get very into jigsaws. I'm just very focused, I guess, on them, and am fairly fast at them. One of the jigsaws that Sam and I did, we did in like 3 hours. Wasn't bad. A 1,000-piece jigsaw. I can't remember which one that was, but one of them we did in about 3 hours. Might have been my Terry Pratchett one. But yeah, that was not bad. We did. Yeah, I think we did. Yeah, I think it was the Pratchett one over Christmas. We did it in a remarkably short space of time. I mean, it was sort of easier. We should consider speed puzzling. Oh, hell no. I only recently learnt that speed puzzling was a thing, and I absolutely am not anywhere near the speed of speed puzzlers. You did one in 3 hours? You were very proud because it said 3 to 5 years on the box. Very good. 10 out of 10. Excellent. Yeah, classic joke, that one. But yeah, I don't know. I enjoy puzzling. It's fun. Dabs. Oh, you dab away, Shitehawk. Please do. But yes. Have I got anything else to talk about? Probably not. I don't think. Oh god, we've got the Sam dabbing emote. Lovely. Don't think so. Oh, I got a very exciting thing for my birthday, which was hilarious because I was out for dinner last night with some of my choir, what I direct, just before our rehearsal, and they're all sort of ladies in their, like, I don't know, probably 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s. There's a fairly wide range of ages. And I the one thing I asked for my birthday from my family / my brother was a clothes steamer, a portable travel clothes steamer, because I am now officially old. And it was very funny because I mentioned it to them and they all went, "Oh, which one?" and all got their phones out, and I was like, oh no, we're getting excited about a clothes steamer. Oh no, I'm officially getting older. I don't like it. It is a very good clothes steamer though, so what can I say? It's when you're starting to ask for like one thing for your birthday and it's a really unexciting thing. Yeah. I feel old. I'm not allowed to say that when Sam's anywhere near the stream. Adulting is when you get excited over household appliances. Absolutely. Yeah. Which is not a bad thing. Getting excited over the small things in life. It's great. When you moved to London, you were really excited about buying a duvet. Ooh, nice. I mean, duvet is a difficult decision to make. Like duvets, mattresses, mattress toppers, sheets, pillows, all of those things. Like, it makes a big difference if you get the wrong one, because then you don't sleep so well. So, yeah. It's like a puzzle. You have no idea how excited you were when you got a new vacuum. Yeah, fair enough. It was cheap from IKEA. I mean, it's still a good thing. Yeah, new vacuum cleaners are pretty great. Yeah. I was about to say something else, and I have forgotten what it was. Cool. Brain is not braining. Right. Can we remember what happened last time in Barchester Towers? Oh, excuse me. Because we got introduced to Mr. Arabin, who is a new addition to our little community at Barchester, who is sort of mainly drama. This is very true. And Mr. Arabin has kind of been invited there by Dr. Grantley, who is the one who doesn't want the bishop that's there, doesn't like Mr. Slope, basically sworn enemies of Mr. Slope now. I think last time a sexy werewolf was introduced into the story. Well, I mean, spoilers. Wasn't going to say, but, you know. Yes, Mr. Arabin has been introduced and, like, is settling into his new curateship or diocese or whatever he is. He's like church and parish, there we go. Church and stuff. And we might have possibly yet another suitor, as Arabin, for Eleanor, which is absolutely fine. So, yeah, that's kind of where we left it. You have no idea, you can't really keep up the story, but it's enjoyable. Yeah, this is true. Oh yeah, we also got introduced to the Ullathorns. Do I mean Ullathorns? Or the Thorns, sorry. At Ullathorn Court, who are sort of like very old-fashioned and obsessed with like lineage and stuff. You know, the landed gentry who can trace their roots back 300 years or something. And anybody who can trace their roots back any more recently than that is not worthy. So, yeah, we got introduced to them as well. Who sounded pretty fun, actually. Like, not necessarily the greatest people, but fun. Like, absolutely, like, 100% voted for Brexit. But, you know. Right. If we are sitting comfortably, and if I can read Roman numerals. Yes, I can. Then we shall begin. Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 23. Mr. Arabin reads himself in at St. Ewald's. On the Sunday morning, the Archdeacon, with his sister-in-law and Mr. Arabin, drove over to Ullathorne as had been arranged. On their way thither, the new vicar declared himself to be considerably disturbed in his mind at the idea of thus facing his parishioners for the first time. He had, he said, been always subject to mauvais honte and an annoying degree of bashfulness, which often unfitted him for any work of a novel description, and now he felt this so strongly that he feared he should acquit himself badly in St. Ewald's reading desk. He knew, he said, that those sharp little eyes of Miss Thorne would be on him, and that they would not approve. All this the Archdeacon greatly ridiculed. He himself knew not, and had never known, what it was to be shy. He could not conceive that Miss Thorne, surrounded as she would be by the peasants of Ullathorne and a few of the poorer inhabitants of the suburbs of Barchester, could in any way affect the composure of a man well accustomed to address the learned congregation of St. Mary's at Oxford, and he laughed accordingly at the idea of Mr. Arabin's modesty. Thereupon Mr. Arabin commenced to subtilise. The change, he said, from St. Mary's to St. Ewald's was quite as powerful on the spirits as would be that from St. Ewald's to St. Mary's. Would not a peer who, by a chance of fortune, might suddenly be driven to herd among navvies as afraid of the jeers of his companions as would any navvy suddenly exalted to a seat among the peers? Whereupon the Archdeacon declared with a loud laugh that he would tell Miss Thorne that her new minister had likened her to a navvy, Eleanor, however, pronounced such a conclusion to be unfair. A comparison might be very just in its proportions, which did not at all assimilate the things compared. But Mr. Arabin went on subtilising, regarding neither the Archdeacon's raillery nor Eleanor's defence. A young lady, he said, would execute with most perfect self-possession a difficult piece of music in a room crowded with strangers, who would not be able to express herself in intelligible language, even on any ordinary subject, and among her most intimate friends, if she were required to do so standing on a box somewhat elevated among them. It was all an affair of education, and he, at 40, found it difficult to educate himself anew. Eleanor dissented on the matter of the box, and averred she could speak very well about dresses or babies or legs of mutton from any box, provided it were big enough for her to stand upon without fear, even though all her friends were listening to her. The Archdeacon was sure she would not be able to say a word, but this proved nothing in favour of Mr. Arabin. Mr. Arabin said that he would try the question out with Mrs. Bold, and get her on a box some day when the rectory might be full of visitors. To this Eleanor assented, making condition that the visitors should be of their own set, and the Archdeacon cogitated in his mind whether by such a condition it was intended that Mr. Slope should be included, resolving also that, if so, the trial would certainly never take place in the rectory drawing-room at Plumstead. And, so arguing, they drove up to the iron gates of Ullathorne Court. Mr. and Miss Thorne were standing ready-dressed for church in the hall, and greeted their clerical visitors with cordiality. The Archdeacon was an old favourite. He was a clergyman of the old school, and this recommended him to the lady. He had always been an opponent of free trade as long as free trade was an open question, and now that it was no longer so, he, being a clergyman, had not been obliged, like most of his lay Tory companions, to read his recantation. He could therefore be regarded as a supporter of the Immaculate 53, and was on this account a favourite with Mr. Thorne. The little bell was tinkling, and the rural population of the parish was standing about the lane, leaning on the church stile and against the walls of the old court, anxious to get a look at their new minister as he passed from the house to the rectory. The Archdeacon's servant had already preceded them thither with the vestments. They all went forth together, and when the ladies passed into the church, the three gentlemen tarried a moment in the lane, that Mr. Thorne might name to the vicar, with some kind of one-sided introduction, the most leading among his parishioners. "Here are our churchwardens, Mr. Arabin, Farmer Greenacre and Mr. Stiles. Mr. Stiles has the mill as you go into Barchester, and very good churchwardens they are." "Not very severe, I hope," said Mr. Arabin. The two ecclesiastical officers touched their hats, and each made a leg in the approved rural fashion, assuring the vicar that they were very glad to have the honour of seeing him, and adding that the weather was very good for the harvest. Mr. Stiles, being a man somewhat versed in town life, had an impression of his own dignity, and did not quite like leaving his pastor under the erroneous idea that he, being a churchwarden, kept the children in order during church time. 'Twas thus he understood Mr. Arabin's allusion to his severity, and hastened to put matters right by observing that "Sexton Clardeeve looked to the young uns, and perhaps sometimes there may be a thought too much stick going on during sermon." Mr. Arabin's bright eye twinkled as he caught that of the Archdeacon's, and he smiled to himself as he observed how ignorant his officers were of the nature of their authority, and of the surveillance which it was their duty to keep even over himself. Mr. Arabin read the lessons and preached. It was enough to put a man a little out, let him have been ever so used to pulpit reading, to see the knowing way in which the farmers cocked their ears and set about a mental criticism as to whether their new minister did or did not fall short of the excellence of him who had lately departed from them. A mental and silent criticism it was for the existing moment, but soon to be made public, among the elders of St. Ewolds over the green graves of their children and forefathers. The excellence, however, of poor old Mr. Goodenough had not been wonderful, and there were few there who did not deem that Mr. Arabin did his work sufficiently well, in spite of the slightly nervous affection which at first impeded him, and which nearly drove the Archdeacon beside himself. But the sermon was the thing to try the man. It often surprises us that very young men can muster the courage to preach for the first time to a strange congregation. Men who are as yet but little more than boys, who have but just left what indeed we may not call a school, but a seminary intended for their tuition of scholars, whose thoughts have been mostly of boating, cricketing, and wine parties, ascend a rostrum high above the heads of the submissive crowd, not that they may read God's word to those below, but that they may preach their own word for the edification of their hearers. It seems strange to us that they are not stricken dumb by the new and awful solemnity of their position. How am I, just turned 23, who have never yet passed 10 thoughtful days since the power of thought first came to me, how am I to instruct these greybeards, who with the weary thinking of so many years have approached so near the grave? Can I teach them their duty? Can I explain to them that which I so imperfectly understand, that which years of study may have made so plain to them? Has my newly acquired privilege as one of God's ministers imparted to me as yet any fitness for the wonderful work of a priest? It must be supposed that such ideas do occur to young clergymen, and yet they overcome, apparently with ease, this difficulty which to us appears to be all but insurmountable. We have never been subjected in the way of ordination to the power of a bishop's hands. It may be that there is in them something that sustains the spirit and banishes the natural modesty of youth. But for ourselves we must own that the deep affection which Dominier Samson felt for his young pupils has not more endeared him to us than the bashful spirit which sent him mute and inglorious from the pulpit when he rose there with the futile attempt to preach God's gospel. There is a rule in our church which forbids the younger order of our clergymen to perform a certain portion of the service. The absolution must be read by a minister in priest's orders. If there be no such minister present, the congregation can have the benefit of no absolution but that which may each succeed in administering to himself. The rule may be a good one, though the necessity for it hardly comes home to the general understanding. But this forbearance on the part of youth would be much more appreciated if it were extended likewise to sermons. The only danger would be that congregations would be too anxious to prevent their young clergymen from advancing themselves in the ranks of the ministry. Clergymen who could not preach would be such blessings that they would be bribed to adhere to their incompetence. Mr. Arabin, however, had not the modesty of youth to impede him, and he succeeded with his sermon even better than with the lessons. He took for his next 2 verses out of the 2nd Epistle of St. John, "Whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ has not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and Son. If there come any unto you, and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him God-speed." He told them that the house of theirs, to which he alluded, was this their church, in which he now addressed them for the first time, that their most welcome and proper manner of bidding him God-speed would be their patient obedience to his teaching of the gospel, but that he could put forward no claim to such conduct on their part unless he taught them the great Christian doctrine of works and faith combined. On this he enlarged, but not very amply, and after 20 minutes succeeded in sending his new friends home to their baked mutton and pudding, well pleased with their new minister. Then came the lunch at Ullathorne. As soon as they were in the hall, Miss Thorne took Mr. Arabin's hand and assured him that she received him into her house, into the temple, she said, in which she worshipped, and bade him Godspeed with all her heart. Mr. Arabin was touched, and squeezed the spinster's hand without uttering a word in reply. Then Mr. Thorne expressed a hope that Mr. Arabin found the church easy for his voice to fill, and Mr. Arabin, having replied that he had no doubt he should do so, as he had learned to pitch his voice to the building, they all sat down to the good things before them. Miss Thorne took special care of Mrs. Bold. Eleanor still wore her widow's weeds, and therefore had about her that air of grave and sad maternity which is the lot of recent widows. This opened the soft heart of Miss Thorne, and made her look on her young guest as though too much could not be done for her. She heaped chicken and ham upon her plate, and poured out for her a full bumper of port wine. When Eleanor, who was not sorry to get it, had drunk a little of it, Miss Thorne at once essayed to fill it again. To this Eleanor objected, but in vain. Miss Thorne winked and nodded and whispered, saying that it was the proper thing and must be done, and that she knew all about it. And so she desired Mrs. Bold to drink up, and not mind anybody. "It is your duty, you know, to support yourself," she said into the ear of the young mother. "There's more than yourself depending on it." And thus she coshered up Eleanor with cold fowl and port wine. How is it that poor men's wives, who have no cold fowl and port wine on which to be coshered up, nurse their children without difficulty, whereas the wives of rich men, who eat and drink everything that is good, cannot do so? We will for the present leave to the doctors and the mothers to settle between them. And then Miss Thorne was great about teeth. Little Johnny Bold had been troubled for the last few days with his first incipient masticator, and with that freemasonry which exists among ladies, Miss Thorne became aware of the fact before Eleanor had half finished her wing. The old lady prescribed at once a receipt which had been much in vogue in the young days of her grandmother, and warned Eleanor with solemn voice against the fallacies of modern medicine. "Take his coral, my dear," said she, "and rub it well with carrot juice. Rub it till the juice dries on it, and then give it to him to play with." "But he hasn't got a coral," said Eleanor. "Not got a coral?" said Miss Thorne, with almost angry vehemence. "Not got a coral? How can you expect that he should cut his teeth? Have you got Daffy's elixir?" Eleanor explained that she had not. It had not been ordered by Mr. Rarechild, the Barchester doctor whom she employed, and then the young mother mentioned some shockingly modern succedaneum, probably wrong, which Mr. Rarechild's new lights had taught him to recommend. Miss Thorne looked awfully severe. "Take care, my dear," said she, "that the man knows what he's about. Take care he doesn't destroy your little boy. But—" and she softened into sorrow as she said it, and spoke more in pity than in anger, "but I don't know who there is in Barchester now that you can trust. Poor dear old Mr. Bumpwell, indeed." "Why, Miss Thorne, he died when I was a little girl." "Yes, my dear, he did, and an unfortunate day it was for Barchester. As to these young men that have come up since—" Mr. Rarechild, by the by, was quite as old as Miss Thorne herself. "One doesn't know where they came from or who they are, or whether they know anything about their business or not." "I think there are very clever men in Barchester," said Eleanor. "Perhaps there may be, only I don't know them. And it's admitted on all sides that medical men aren't now what they used to be. They used to be talented, observing, educated men, but now any whipper-snapper out of an apothecary's shop can call himself a doctor. I believe no kind of education is now thought necessary." Eleanor was herself the widow of a medical man, and felt a little inclined to resent all these hard sayings. but Miss Thorne was so essentially good-natured that it was impossible to resent anything she said. She therefore sipped her wine and finished her chicken. "At any rate, my dear, don't forget the carrot juice, and by all means get him a coral at once. My grandmother Thorne had the best teeth in the county, and carried them to the grave with her at 80. I have heard her say it was all the carrot juice. She couldn't bear the Barchester doctors. Even poor old Dr. Bumpwell didn't please her." It clearly never occurred to Miss Thorne that some 50 years ago Dr. Bumpwell was only a rising man, and therefore as much in need of character in the eyes of the then ladies of Ullathorne as the present doctors were in her own. The Archdeacon made a very good lunch, and talked to his host about turnip drillers and new machines for reaping, while the host, thinking it only polite to attend to a stranger, and fearing that perhaps he might not care about turnip crops on a Sunday, mooted all manner of ecclesiastical subjects. "I never saw a heavier lot of wheat, Thorne, than you've got there in that field beyond the copse. I suppose that's guano," said the Archdeacon. "Yes, guano. I get it from Bristol myself. You'll find you often have a tolerable congregation of Barchester people out here, Mr. Arabin. They are very fond of St. Ewald's, particularly of an afternoon when the weather is not too hot for the walk." "Oh, thanks, Andy." "I am under an obligation to them for staying away today, at any rate," said the vicar. "The congregation can never be too small for a maiden's sermon." "I got 1.5 tons at Bradley's in High Street," said the Archdeacon, "and it was a complete take-in. I don't believe there was 500 weight of guano in it." "That Bradley never has anything good," said Miss Thorne, who had just caught the name during her whisperings with Eleanor. "And such a nice shop as there used to be in that very house before he came. Wilfrid, don't you remember what good things old Ambleoff used to have?" "There have been 3 men since Ambleoff's time," said the Archdeacon, "and each as bad as the other. But who gets it for you at Bristol, Thorne?" "I ran up myself this year and brought it out of the ship. I am afraid as the evenings get shorter, Mr. Arabin, you'll find the reading desk too dark. I must send a fellow with an axe and make him lop off some of those branches." Mr. Arabin declared that the morning light at any rate was perfect, and deprecated any interference with the lime trees. And then they took a stroll out among the trim parterres, and Mr. Arabin explained to Mrs. Bold the difference between a naiad and a dryad, and dilated on vases and the shapes of urns. Miss Thorne busied herself among her pansies, and her brother, finding it quite impracticable to give anything of a peculiarly Sunday tone to the conversation, abandoned the attempt, and had it out with the Archdeacon about the Bristol guano. At 3 o'clock they again went into church, and now Mr. Arabin read the service and the Archdeacon preached. Nearly the same congregation was present, with some adventurous pedestrians from the city who had not thought the heat of the midday August sun too great to deter them. The Archdeacon took his text from the Epistle to Philemon. Oh, turn 2 pages. "I beseech thee for my son Onesimus, whatever the word is, whom I have begotten in my bonds." From such a text it may be imagined the kind of sermon which Dr. Grantley preached, and, on the whole, it was neither dull, nor bad, nor out of place. He told them that it had become his duty to look about for a pastor for them, to supply the place of one who had been long among them, and that in this manner he regarded as a son him whom he had selected, as St. Paul had regarded the young disciple whom he sent forth. Then he took a little merit to himself for having studiously provided the best man he could without reference to patronage or favour. But he did not say that the best man, according to his views, was he who was best able to subdue Mr. Slope, and make that gentleman's situation in Barchester too hot to be comfortable. As to the bonds, they had consisted in the exceeding struggle which he had made to get a good clergyman for them. He deprecated any comparison between himself and St. Paul, but said that he was entitled to beseech them for their goodwill towards Mr. Arabin, in the same manner that the apostle had besought Philemon and his household with regard to Onesimus. The archdeacon's sermon, text, blessing, and all was concluded within the half-hour. Then they shook hands with their Ullathorne friends and returned to Plumstead. 'Twas thus that Mr. Arabin read himself in at St. Ewald's. Chapter 24. Mr. Slope manages matters very cleverly at Puddingdale. The next 2 weeks passed pleasantly enough at Plumstead. The whole party there assembled seemed to get on well together. Eleanor made the house agreeable, and the Archdeacon and Mrs. Grantley seemed to have forgotten her iniquity as regarded Mr. Slope. Mr. Harding had his violoncello, and played to them while his daughters accompanied him. Johnny Bold, by the help either of Mr. Rarechild or else by that of his coral and carrot juice, got through his teething troubles. There had been gaieties, too, of all sorts. They had dined at Ullathorne, and the Thorns had dined at the rectory. Eleanor had been duly put to stand on her box, and in that position had found herself quite unable to express her opinion on the merits of flounces, such having been the subject given to try her elocution. Mr. Arabin had, of course, been much in his own parish, looking to the doings at his vicarage, calling on his parishioners, and taking on himself the duties of his new calling. But still he had been every evening at Plumstead, and Mrs. Grantley was partly willing to agree with her husband that he was a pleasant inmate in a house. They had also been at a dinner party at Dr. Stanhope's, of which Mr. Arabin had made one. He also, moth-like, burned his wings in the flames of the Signora's candle. Mrs. Bold, too, had been there, and had felt somewhat displeased with the want of taste she called it, shown by Mr. Arabin in paying so much attention to Madame Neroni. It was as infallible that Madeline should displease and irritate the women as that she should charm and captivate the men. The one result followed naturally on the other. It was quite true that Mr. Arabin had been charmed. He thought her a very clever and a very handsome woman. He thought also that her peculiar affliction entitled her to the sympathy of all. He had never, he said, met so much suffering joined to such perfect beauty and so clear a mind. 'Twas thus he spoke of the Signora coming home in the Archdeacon's carriage, and Eleanor by no means liked to hear the praise. It was, however, exceedingly unjust of her to be angry with Mr. Arabin, as she had herself spent a very pleasant evening with Bertie Stanhope, who had taken her down to dinner and had not left her side for one moment after the gentleman came out of the dining-room. It was unfair that she should amuse herself with Bertie and yet begrudge her new friend his licence of amusing himself with Bertie's sister. And yet she did so. She was half angry with him in the carriage, and said something about meretricious manners. Mr. Arabin did not understand the ways of women very well, or else he might have flattered himself that Eleanor was in love with him. But Eleanor was not in love with him. How many shades there are between love and indifference, and how little the graduated scale is understood. She had now been nearly 3 weeks in the same house with Mr. Arabin, and had received much of his attention, and listened daily to his conversation. He had usually devoted at least some portion of his evening to her exclusively. At Dr. Stanhope's he had devoted himself exclusively to another. It does not require that a woman should be in love to be irritated at this. It does not require that she should even acknowledge to herself that it is unpleasant to her. Eleanor had no such self-knowledge. She thought in her own heart that it was only on Mr. Arabin's account that she regretted that he could condescend to be amused by the Signora. I thought he had more mind, she said to herself, as she sat watching her baby's cradle on her return from the party. After all, I believe Mr. Stanhope is the pleasanter man of the two. Alas for the memory of poor John Bold. Eleanor was not in love with Bertie Stanhope, nor was she in love with Mr. Arabin. But her devotion to her late husband was fast fading when she could revolve in her mind over the cradle of his infant the faults and failings of other aspirants to her favour. Will anyone blame my heroine for this? Let him or her rather thank God for all his goodness, for his mercy endureth for ever. Eleanor, in truth, was not in love. Neither was Mr. Arabin. Neither, indeed, was Bertie Stanhope, though he had already found occasion to say nearly as much that he was. The widow's cap had prevented him from making a positive declaration, when otherwise he would have considered himself entitled to do so on a third or fourth interview. It was, after all, but a small cap now, and had but little of the weeping willow left in its construction. It is singular how these emblems of grief fade away by unseen gradations. Each pretends to be the counterpart of the forerunner, and yet the last little bit of crimped white crepe that sits so jauntily on the back of the head is as dissimilar to the first huge mountain of woe which disfigured the face of the weeper, as the state of the Hindu is to the jointure of the English dowager. But let it be clearly understood that Eleanor was in love with no one, and that no one was in love with Eleanor. Under these circumstances her anger against Mr. Arabin did not last long, and before 2 days were over they were both as good friends as ever. She could not but like him, for every hour spent in his company was spent pleasantly. And yet she could not quite like him, for there was always apparent in his conversation a certain feeling on his part that he hardly thought it worth his while to be in earnest. It was almost as though he were playing with a child. She knew well enough that he was in truth a sober, thoughtful man, who in some matter and on some occasions could endure an agony of earnestness. And yet to her he was always gently playful. Could she have seen his brow once clouded, she might have learnt to love him. So things went on at Plumstead, and on the whole not unpleasantly, till a huge storm darkened the horizon and came down upon the inhabitants of the rectory with all the fury of a waterspout. It was astonishing how in a few minutes the whole face of the heavens was changed. The party broke up from breakfast in perfect harmony, but fierce passions had arisen before the evening which did not admit of their sitting at the same board for dinner. To explain this, it will be necessary to go back a little. It will be remembered that the bishop expressed to Mr. Slope in his dressing-room his determination that Mr. Quiverful should be confirmed in his appointment to the hospital, and that his lordship requested Mr. Slope to communicate this decision to the Archdeacon. It will also be remembered that the Archdeacon had indignantly declined seeing Mr. Slope, and had instead written a strong letter to the bishop, in which he all but demanded the situation of warden for Mr. Harding. To this letter the Archdeacon received an immediate formal reply from Mr. Slope, in which it was stated that the bishop had received and would give his best consideration to the Archdeacon's letter. The Archdeacon felt himself somewhat checkmated by this reply. What could he do with a man who would neither see him nor argue with him by letter, and who had undoubtedly the power of appointing any clergyman he pleased? He had consulted with Mr. Arabin, who had suggested the propriety of calling in the aid of the Master of Lazarus. If, said he, you and Dr. Gwynn formally declare your intention of waiting upon the bishop will not dare to refuse to see you, and if 2 such men as you are to see him together, you will probably not leave him without carrying your point. The Archdeacon did not quite like admitting the necessity of his being backed by the Master of Lazarus before he could obtain admission into the Episcopal Palace of Barchester, but he still felt the advice was good, and he resolved to take it. He wrote again to the bishop, expressing a hope that nothing further would be done in the matter of the hospital till the consideration promised by his lordship had been given, and then sent off a warm appeal to his friend the master, imploring him to come to Plumstead and assist in driving the bishop into compliance. The master had rejoiced, raising some difficulty, but not declining, and the archdeacon had again pressed his point, insisting on the necessity for immediate action. Dr. Gwynne unfortunately had the gout, and could therefore name no immediate day, but still agreed to come if it should be finally found necessary. So the matter stood as regarding the party at Plumstead. But Mr. Harding had another friend fighting his battle for him, quite as powerful as the Master of Lazarus, and this was Mr. Slope. Though the bishop had so pertinaciously insisted on giving way to his wife in the matter of the hospital, Mr. Slope did not think it necessary to abandon his object. He had, he thought, daily more and more reason to imagine that the widow would receive his overtures favourably, and that he could not but feel that Mr. Harding at the hospital, and placed there by his means, would be more likely to receive him as a son-in-law than Mr. Harding growling in opposition and disappointment under the archdeacon's wing at Plumstead. Moreover, to give Mr. Slope due credit, he was actuated by greater motives even than these. He wanted a wife, and he wanted money, but he wanted power more than either. He had fully realised the fact that he must come to blows with Mrs. Proudie. He had no desire to remain in Barchester as her chaplain. Sooner than do so, he would risk the loss of his whole connection with the diocese. What? Was he to feel within him the possession of no ordinary talents? Was he to know himself to be courageous, firm, and in matters where his conscience did not interfere, unscrupulous, and yet be contented to be the working factotum of a woman prelate? Mr. Slope had higher ideas of his own destiny. Either he or Mrs. Proudie must go to the wall, and now had come the time when he would try which it should be. The bishop had declared that Mr. Quiverful should be the new warden. As Mr. Slope went downstairs, prepared to see the archdeacon if necessary, but fully satisfied that no such necessity would arise, he declared to himself that Mr. Harding should be warden. With the object of carrying this point, he rode over to Puddingdale, and had a further interview with the worthy expectant of clerical good things. Mr. Quiverful was, on the whole, a worthy man. The impossible task of bringing up as ladies and gentlemen 14 children on an income which was insufficient to give them with decency the common necessaries of life had had an effect upon him not beneficial either to his spirit or his keen sense of honour. Who can boast that he would have supported such a burden with a different result? Mr. Quiverful was an honest, painstaking, drudging man, anxious, indeed, for bread and meat, anxious for means to quiet his butcher and cover with returning smiles the now sour countenance of the baker's wife, but anxious also to be right with his own conscience. He was not careful, as another might be who sat on an easier worldly seat, to stand well with those around him, to shun a breath which might sully his name, or a rumour which might affect his honour. He could not afford such niceties of conduct, such moral luxuries. It must suffice for him to be ordinarily honest according to the ordinary honesty of the world's ways, and to let men's tongues wag as they would. He had felt that his brother clergymen, men whom he had known for the last 20 years, looked coldly on him from the first moment that he had shown himself willing to sit at the feet of Mr. Slope. He had seen that their looks grew colder still when it became bruited about that he was to be the bishop's new warden at Hiram's Hospital. This was painful enough, but it was the cross which he was doomed to bear. He thought of his wife, whose last new silk dress was 6 years in wear. He thought of all his young flock, whom he could hardly take to church with him on Sundays, for there were not decent shoes and stockings for them all to wear. He thought of the well-worn sleeves of his own black coat, and of the stern face of the draper from whom he would fain ask for cloth to make another, did he not know that the credit would be refused him. Then he thought of the comfortable house in Barchester, of the comfortable income, of his boys sent to school, of his girls with books in their hands instead of darning needles, of his wife's face again covered with smiles, and of his daily board again covered with plenty. He thought of these things, and do thou also, reader, think of them, and then wonder, if thou canst, that Mr. Slope had appeared to him to possess all those good gifts which could grace a bishop's chaplain. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings. Why, moreover, should the Barchester clergy have looked coldly on Mr. Quiverful? Had they not all shown that they regarded with complacency the loaves and fishes of their mother church? Had they not all, by some hook or crook, done better for themselves than he had done? They were not burdened as he was burdened. Dr. Grantley had 5 children, and nearly as many thousands a year on which to feed them. It was very well for him to turn up his nose at a new bishop who could do nothing for him, and a chaplain who was beneath his notice, but it was cruel in a man so circumstanced to set the world against the father of 14 children because he was anxious to obtain for them an honourable support. He, Mr. Quiverful, had not asked for the wardenship. He had not even accepted it till he had been assured that Mr. Harding had refused it. How hard, then, that he should be blamed for doing that which not to have done would have argued a most insane imprudence. Thus, in this matter of the hospital, poor Mr. Quiverful had his trials, and he had also his consolations. On the whole, the consolations were the more vivid of the two. The stern draper heard of the coming promotion, and the wealth of his warehouse was at Mr. Quiverful's disposal. Coming events cast their shadows before, and the coming event of Mr. Quiverful's transference to Barchester produced a delicious shadow in the shape of a new outfit for Mrs. Quiverful and her 3 elder daughters. Such consolations come home to the heart of a man, and quite home to the heart of a woman. Whatever the husband might feel, the wife cared nothing for frowns of dean, archdeacon, or prebendary. To her, the outsides and insides of her husband and 14 children were everything. In her bosom, every other ambition had been swallowed up in that maternal ambition of seeing them and him and herself duly clad and properly fed. It had come to that with her that life had now no other purpose. She recked nothing of the imaginary rights of others. She had no patience with her husband when he declared to her that he could not accept the hospital unless he knew that Mr. Harding had refused it. Her husband had no right to be quixotic at the expense of 14 children. The narrow escape of throwing away his good fortune which her lord had had almost paralysed her. Now, indeed, they had received the full promise not only from Mr. Slope, but also from Mrs. Proudie. Now, indeed, they might reckon with safety on their good fortune. But what if all had been lost? What if her 14 bairns had been re-steeped to the hips in poverty by the morbid sentimentality of their father? Mrs. Quiverful was just at present a happy woman, but yet it nearly took her breath away when she thought of the risk they had run. "I don't know what your father means when he talks so much of what is due to Mr. Harding," she said to her eldest daughter. "Does he think that Mr. Harding would give him 450 a year out of fine feeling? And what signifies it whom he offends, as long as he gets the place? He does not expect anything better. It passes me to think how your father can be so soft, while everybody around him is so griping. Griping." Thus, while the outer world was accusing Mr. Quiverful of rapacity for promotion and of disregard to his honour, the inner world of his own household was falling foul of him. with equal vehemence, for his unwillingness to sacrifice their interest to a false feeling of sentimental pride. It is astonishing how much difference the point of view makes in the aspect of all that we look at. Such were the feelings of the different members of the family at Puddingdale on the occasion of Mr. Slope's second visit. Mrs. Quiverful, as soon as she saw his horse coming up the avenue from the vicarage gate, hastily packed up a huge basket of needlework and hurried herself and her daughter out of the room in which she was sitting with her husband. "It's Mr. Slope," she said. "He's come to settle with you about the hospital. I do hope we shall now be able to move at once." And she hastened to bid the maid of all work go to the door, so that the welcome great man might not be kept waiting. Mr. Slope thus found Mr. Quiverful alone. Mrs. Quiverful went off to her kitchen and back settlements with anxious beating heart, almost dreading that there might be some slip between the cup of her happiness and the lip of her fruition, but yet comforting herself with the reflection that after what had taken place, any such slip could hardly be possible. Mr. Slope was all smiles as he shook his brother clergyman's hand, and said that he had ridden over because he thought it right at once to put Mr. Quiverful in possession of the facts of the matter regarding the wardenship of the hospital. As he spoke, the poor expectant husband and father saw at a glance that his brilliant hopes were to be dashed to the ground, and that his visitor was now there for the purpose of unsaying what on his former visit he had said. There was something in the tone of the voice, something in the glance of the eye, which told the tale. Mr. Quiverful knew it all at once. He maintained his self-possession, however, smiled with a slight unmeaning smile, and merely said that he was obliged to Mr. Slope for the trouble he was taking. "It has been a troublesome matter from first to last," said Mr. Slope, "and the bishop has hardly known how to act. Between ourselves, but mind, this, of course, must go no further, Mr. Quiverful." Mr. Quiverful said that of course it should not. The truth is that poor Mr. Harding has not hardly known his own mind. You remember our last conversation, no doubt? Mr. Quiverful assured him that he remembered it very well indeed. You will remember that I told you that Mr. Harding had refused to return to the hospital. Mr. Quiverful declared that nothing could be more distinct on his memory. "And acting on this refusal, I suggested that you should take the hospital," continued Mr. Slope. "I understood you to say that the bishop had authorised you to offer it to me." "Did I? Did I go so far as that? Well, perhaps it may be that in my anxiety in your behalf I did commit myself further than I should have done. So far as my own memory serves me, I don't think I did go quite so far as that, but I own I was very anxious that you should get it, and I may have said more than was quite prudent." "But," said Mr. Quiverful, in his deep anxiety to prove his case, "my wife received as distinct a promise from Mrs. Proudie as one human being could give to another." Mr. Slope smiled, and gently shook his head. He meant that smile for a pleasant smile, but it was diabolical in the eyes of the man he was speaking to. "Mrs. Proudie," he said. "If we are to go to what passes between the ladies in these matters, we shall really be in a nest of troubles from which we shall never extricate ourselves. Mrs. Proudie is a most excellent lady, kind-hearted, charitable, pious, and in every way estimable. But, my dear Mr. Quiverful, the patronage of the diocese is not in her hands." Mr. Quiverful for a moment sat panic-stricken and silent. "Am I to understand, then, that I received no promise?" he said, as soon as he had sufficiently collected his thoughts. "If you will allow me, I will tell you exactly how the matter rests. You certainly did receive a promotion. a promise conditional on Mr. Harding's refusal. I am sure you will do me the justice to remember that you yourself declared that you could accept the appointment on no other condition than the knowledge that Mr. Harding had declined it." "Yes," said Mr. Quiverful, "I did say that, certainly." "Well, it now appears that he did not refuse it." "But surely you told me, and repeated it more than once, that he had done so in your own hearing." "So I understood him, but it seems I was in error. But don't for a moment, Mr. Quiverful, suppose that I mean to throw you over. No. Having held out my hand to a man in your position, with your large family and pressing claims, I am not now going to draw it back again. I only want you to act with me fairly and honestly." "Whatever I do, I shall endeavour at any rate to act fairly," said the poor man, feeling that he had to fall back for support on the spirit of martyrdom within him. "I am sure you will," said the other. "I am sure you have no wish to obtain possession of an income which belongs by all right to another. No man knows better than you do Mr. Harding's history, or can better appreciate his character. Mr. Harding is very desirous of returning to his old position, and the bishop feels that he is at the present moment somewhat hampered, though of course he is not bound by the conversation which took place on the matter between you and me." "Well," said Mr. Quiverful, dreadfully doubtful as to what his conduct under such circumstances should be. Excuse me. And fruitlessly striving to harden his nerves with some of that instinct of self-preservation which had made his wife so bold. "The wardenship of this little hospital is not the only thing in the bishop's gift, Mr. Quiverful, nor is it by many degrees the best. And his lordship is not the man to forget anyone whom he has once marked with approval. If you would allow me to advise you as a friend—" "Indeed, I shall be most grateful to you," said the poor vicar of Puddingdale. "I should advise you to withdraw from any opposition to Mr. Harding's claims. If you persist in your demand, I do not think you will ultimately succeed. But Mr. Harding has all but a positive right to the place. But if you will allow me to inform the bishop that you decline to stand in Mr. Harding's way, I think I may promise you, though, by the by, it must not be taken as a formal promise, that the bishop will not allow you to be a poorer man than you would have been had you become warden." Mr. Quiverful sat in his armchair silent, gazing at vacancy. What was he to say? All this that came from Mr. Slope was so true. Mr. Harding had a right to the hospital. The bishop had a great many good things to give away. Both the bishop and Mr. Slope would be excellent friends and terrible enemies to a man in his position. And then he had no proof of any promise. He could not force the bishop to appoint him. "Well, Mr. Quiverful, what do you say about it?" "Oh, of course, whatever you think fit, Mr. Slope. It's a great disappointment, a very great disappointment. I won't deny that I am a very poor man, Mr. Slope. In the end, Mr. Quiverful, you will find that it will have been better for you." The interview ended in Mr. Slope receiving a full renunciation from Mr. Quiverful of any claim he might have to the appointment in question. It was only given verbally and without witnesses, but then the original promise was made in the same way. Mr. Slope again assured him that he should not be forgotten, and then rode back to Barchester, satisfied that he would now be able to mould the bishop to his wishes. And I think there we shall take a break. A drama! Well, sort of. But yes, go do break-related things, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. everybody. I hope we have all had a good little break. I have put the final 5 pieces of my jigsaw in, and it is now done. So I may take a picture of it and put it in the Discord later, because it's a very pretty jigsaw, and I like it very much. I always feel bad though with jigsaws, just like I don't know, I feel like I should take longer on them. To kind of, savour them. But, I don't know. But yes. I guess I might just carry on immediately, just because I think the next chapter's quite a long one. Oh, sorry, I just punched the mic. Whoopsie. Oh no, the next one isn't the one after. But yes, if we are all sitting comfortably, then I shall begin again. Yeah, I need to get this done. Oh, it's over. What do I do now? Exactly. Yeah. That. But yes, if we're all sitting comfortably. Wait. Do you keep them put together and frame them, or take apart and do them again later? That. The latter. I do not put them together and frame them. Number one, I have sloped walls/ceilings in my room, so nothing goes on them. So yeah. Anyway, let us continue. Chapter 25. 14 arguments in favour of Mr. Quiverful's claims. We have most of us heard of the terrible anger of a lioness when, surrounded by her cubs, she guards her prey. Few of us wish to disturb the mother of a litter of puppies when mouthing a bone in the midst of her young family. Medea and her children are familiar to us, and so is the grief of Constance. Mrs. Quiverful, when she first heard from her husband the news which he had to impart, felt within her bosom all the rage of a lioness, the rapacity of the hound, the fury of the tragic queen, and the deep despair of the bereaved mother. Doubting, but yet hardly fearing, what might have been the tenor of Mr. Slope's discourse, she rushed back to her husband as soon as the front door was closed behind the visitor. It was well for Mr. Slope that he so escaped. The anger of such a woman at such a moment would have cowed even him. As a general rule, it is highly desirable that ladies should keep their temper. A woman, when she storms, always makes herself ugly, and usually ridiculous also. There is nothing so odious to man as a virago. Though Theseus loved an Amazon, he showed his love but roughly, and from the time of Theseus downward, no man ever wished to have his wife remarkable rather for forward prowess than retiring gentleness. A low voice is an excellent thing in woman. Such may be laid down as a very general rule, and few women should allow themselves to deviate from it, and then only on rare occasions. But if there be a time when a woman may let her hair to the winds, when she may loose her arms and scream out trumpet-tongued to the ears of men, it is when nature calls out within her, not for her own wants, but the wants of those whom her womb has borne, whom her breasts have suckled, for those who look to her for their daily bread, as naturally as man looks to his Creator. There was nothing poetic in the nature of Mrs. Quiverful. She was neither a Medea nor a Constance. When angry, she spoke out her anger in plain words, and in a tone which might have been modulated with advantage, but she did so, at any rate, without affectation. Now, without knowing it, she rose to a tragic vein. "Well, my dear, we are not to have it." Such were the words with which her ears were greeted when she entered the parlour, still hot from the kitchen fire. And the face of her husband spoke even more plainly than his words. E'en such a man, so faint, so spiritless, so dull, so dead in look, so woe-begone, drew Priam's curtain in the dead of night. "What?" said she, and Mrs. Siddons could not have put more passion into a single syllable. "What? Not have it? Who says so?" and she sat opposite to her husband, with her elbows on the table, her hands clasped together, and her coarse, solid, but once handsome face stretched over it towards him. She sat as silent as death while he told his story, and very dreadful to him her silence was. He told it very lamely and badly, but still in such a manner that she soon understood the whole of it. "And so you have resigned it?" said she. "I have had no opportunity of accepting it," he replied. "I had no witnesses to Mr. Slope's offer, even if that offer would bind the bishop. It was better for me, on the whole, to keep on good terms with such men than to fight for what I should never get." "Witnesses!" she screamed, rising quickly to her feet and walking up and down the room. "Do clergymen require witnesses to their words? He made the promise in the bishop's name, and if it is to be broken, I'll know the reason why. Did he not positively say that the bishop had sent him to offer you the place?" "He did, my dear. But that is now nothing to the purpose." "It is everything to the purpose, Mr. Quiverful. Witnesses indeed, and then to talk of your honour being questioned because you wish to provide for 14 children. It is everything to the purpose, and so they shall know if I scream it into their ears from the town cross of Barchester." "You forget, Letitia, that the bishop has so many things in his gift. We must wait a little longer, that is all." "Wait? Shall we feed the children by waiting? Will waiting put George and Tom and Sam out into the world? Will it enable my poor girls to give up some of their drudgery? Will waiting make Bessie and Janie fit even to be governesses? Will waiting pay for the things we got in Barchester last week?" "It is all we can do, my dear. The disappointment is as much to me as to you, and yet, God knows, I feel it more for your sake than my own." Mrs. Quiverful was looking full into her husband's face, and saw a small hot tear appear on each of those furrowed cheeks. This was too much for her woman's heart. He also had risen, and was standing with his back to the empty grate. She rushed towards him, and seizing him in her arms, sobbed aloud upon his bosom. "You are too good, too soft, too yielding," she said at last. "These men, when they want you, they use you like a cat's paw, and when they want you no longer, they throw you aside like an old shoe. This is twice they have treated you so." "In one way this will all be for the better," argued he. "It will make the bishop feel that he is bound to do something for me." "At any rate, he shall hear of it," said the lady, again reverting to her more angry mood. "At any rate, he shall hear of it, and that loudly, and so shall she. She little knows Letitia Quiverful, if she thinks I will sit down quietly with the loss after all that passed between us at the palace. If there's any feeling within her, I'll make her ashamed of herself." And she paced the room again, stamping the floor as she went with her fat, heavy foot. Good heavens! What a heart she must have within her to treat in such a way as this the father of 14 unprovided children. Mr. Quiverful proceeded to explain that he didn't think that Mrs. Proudie had anything to do with it. "Don't tell me," said Mrs. Quiverful. "I know more about it than that. Doesn't all the world know that Mrs. Proudie is Bishop of Barchester, that Mr. Slope is merely her creature? Wasn't it she that made me the promise, just as though the thing was in her own particular gift? I tell you, it was that woman who sent him over here today, because for some reason of her own she wants to go back up from her word." "My dear, you're wrong. Now, Q, don't be so soft," she continued. "Take my word for it. The bishop knows no more about it than Jemima does." Jemima was the 2-year-old. "And if you'll take my advice, you'll lose no time in going over and seeing him yourself." Soft, however, as Mr. Quiverful might be, he would not allow himself to be talked out of his opinion on this occasion, and proceeded with much minuteness to explain to his wife the tone in which Mr. Slope had spoken of Mrs. Proudie's interference in diocesan matters. As he did so, a new idea gradually instilled itself into the matron's head, and a new course of conduct presented itself to her judgment. What if, after all, Mrs. Proudie knew nothing of this visit of Mr. Slope's? In that case, might it not be possible that that lady would still be staunch to her in this matter, still stand her friend, and perhaps possibly carry her through in opposition to Mr. Slope? Mrs. Quiverful said nothing as this vague hope occurred to her, but listened with more than ordinary patience to what her husband had to say. While he was still explaining that in all probability the world was wrong in its estimation of Mrs. Proudie's power and authority, she had fully made up her mind as to her course of action. She did not, however, proclaim her intention. She shook her head ominously as he continued his narration, and when he had completed she rose to go, merely observing that it was cruel, cruel treatment. She then asked him if he would mind waiting for a late dinner instead of dining at their usual hour of 3, and having received from him a concession on this point, she proceeded to carry her purpose into execution. She determined that she would at once go to the palace, that she would do so, if possible, before Mrs. Proudie could have had an interview with Mr. Slope, and that she would be either submissive, piteous and pathetic, or else indignant, violent and exacting, according to the manner in which she was received. She was quite confident in her own power. Strengthened as she was by the pressing wants of 14 children, she felt that she could make her way through legions of episcopal servants, and force herself, if need be, into the presence of the lady who had so wronged her. She had no shame about it, no mauvais honte, no dread of archdeacons. She would, as she declared to her husband, make her wail heard in the marketplace if she did not get redress and justice. It might be very well for an unmarried young curate to be shamefaced in such matters. It might be all right that a snug rector, really in want of nothing, but still looking for better preferment, should carry on his affairs decently under the rose. But Mrs. Quiverful, with 14 children, had given over being shamefaced, and in some things had given over being decent. If it were intended that she should be ill-used in the manner proposed by Mr. Slope, it should not be done under the rose. All the world should know of it. In her present mood, Mrs. Quiverful was not over-careful about her attire. She tied her bonnet under her chin, threw her shawl over her shoulders, armed herself with the old family cotton umbrella, and started for Barchester. A journey to the palace was not quite so easy a thing for Mrs. Quiverful as for our friend at Plumstead. Plumstead is 9 miles from Barchester, and Puddingdale is but 4. But the Archdeacon could order round his brougham, and his high-trotting, fast-bay gelding would take him into the city within the hour. There was no brougham at the coach-house of Puddingdale Vicarage, no bay horse in the stables. There was no method of locomotion for its inhabitants but that which nature has assigned to man. Mrs. Quiverful was a broad, heavy woman, not young nor given to walking. In her kitchen and in the family dormitories she was active enough, but her pace and gait were not adapted for the road. A walk into Barchester and back in the middle of an August day would be to her a terrible task, if not altogether impracticable. There was living in the parish, about half a mile from the vicarage on the road to the city, a decent, kindly farmer, well-to-do as regards this world, and so far mindful of the next that he attended his parish church with decent regularity. To him Mrs. Quiverful had before now appealed in some of her more pressing family troubles, and had not appealed in vain. At his door she now presented herself, and having explained to his wife that most urgent business required her to go at once to Barchester, begged that Farmer Subsoil would take her thither in his tax cart. The farmer did not reject her plan, and as soon as Prince could be got into his collar, they started on their journey. Mrs. Quiverful did not mention the purpose of her business, nor did the farmer alloy his kindness by any unseemly questions. She merely begged to be put down at the bridge going into the city, and to be taken up again at the same place in the course of 2 hours. The farmer promised to be punctual to his appointment, and the lady, supported by her umbrella, took the short cut to the close, and in a few minutes was at the bishop's door. Hitherto she had felt no dread with regard to the coming interview. She had felt nothing but an indignant longing to pour forth her claims and declare her wrongs if those claims were not fully admitted. But now the difficulty of her situation touched her a little. She had been at the palace once before, but then she went to give grateful thanks. Those who have thanks to return for favours received find easy admittance to the halls of the great. Such is not always the case with men or even with women who have favours to beg. Still less easy is access for those who demand the fulfilment of promises already made. Mrs. Quiverful had not been slow to learn the ways of the world. She knew all this, and she knew also that her cotton umbrella and all but ragged shawl would not command respect in the eyes of the palatial servants. If she were too humble, she knew well that she would never succeed. To overcome by imperious overbearing with such a shawl as hers upon her shoulders and such a bonnet on her head would have required a personal bearing very superior to that with which nature had endowed her. Of this also Mrs. Quiverful was aware. She must make it known that she was the wife of a gentleman and a clergyman, and must yet condescend to conciliate. The poor lady knew but one way to overcome these difficulties at the very threshold of her enterprise, and to this she resorted. Low as were the domestic funds at Puddingdale, she still retained possession of 1/2 crown, and this she sacrificed to the avarice of Mrs. Proudie's metropolitan sesquipedalian serving man. Some of these words. She was, she said, Mrs. Quiverful of Puddingdale, the wife of the Reverend Mr. Quiverful. She wished to see Mrs. Proudie. It was indeed quite indispensable that she should see Mrs. Proudie. Sorry, these names are great. James Fitzplush looked worse than dubious, did not know whether his lady were out or engaged or in her bedroom, thought it most probable she was subject to one of these or to some other cause that would make her invisible, but Mrs. Quiverful could sit down in the waiting-room while inquiry was being made of Mrs. Proudie's maid. "Look here, my man," said Mrs. Quiverful, "I must see her." And she put her card and 1/2 crown, think of it, my reader, think of it, her last 1/2 crown, into the man's hand, and sat herself down on a chair in the waiting-room. Whether the bribe carried the day, or whether the bishop's wife really chose to see the vicar's wife, it boots not now to inquire. The man returned, and begging Mrs. Quiverful to follow him, ushered her into the presence of the mistress of the diocese. Mrs. Quiverful at once saw that her patroness was in a smiling humour. Triumph sat throned upon her brow, and all the joys of dominion hovered about her curls. Her lord had that morning contested with her a great point. He had received an invitation to spend a couple of days with the Archbishop. His soul longed for the gratification. Not a word, however, in his Grace's note alluded to the fact of his being a married man, and if he went at all, he must go alone. This necessity would have presented no insurmountable bar to the visit, or have militated much against the pleasure, had he been able to go without any reference to Mrs. Proudie. But this he could not do. He could not order his portmanteau to be packed, and start with his own man, merely telling the lady of his heart that he would probably be back on Saturday. There are men, may we not rather say monsters, who do such things, and there are wives, may we not rather say slaves, who put up with such usage. But Dr. and Mrs. Proudie were not among the number. The bishop, with some beating about the bush, made the lady understand that he very much wished to go. The lady, without any beating about the bush, made the bishop understand that she wouldn't hear of it. It would be useless here to repeat the arguments that were used on each side, and needless to record the result. Those who are married will understand very well how the battle was lost and won, and those who are single will never understand it till they learn the lesson which experience alone can give. When Mrs. Quiverful was shown into Mrs. Proudie's room, that lady had only returned a few minutes from her lord. But before she left him, she had seen the answer to the Archbishop's note written and sealed. No wonder that her face was wreathed with smiles as she received Mrs. Quiverful. She instantly spoke of the subject which was so near the heart of her visitor. "Well, Mrs. Quiverful," said she, "is it decided yet when you are to move into Barchester?" That woman, as she had an hour or two since been called, became instantly re-endowed with all the graces that can adorn a bishop's wife. Mrs. Quiverful immediately saw that her business was to be piteous, and that nothing was to be gained by indignation. Nothing, indeed, unless she could be indignant in company with her patroness. "Oh, Mrs. Proudie," she began, "I fear we are not to move to Barchester at all." "Why not?" said that lady sharply, dropping at a moment's notice her smiles and condescension, and turning with her sharp, quick way to business, which she saw at a glance was important. And then Mrs. Quiverful told her tale. As she progressed in the history of her wrongs, she perceived that the heavier she leaned upon Mr. Slope, the blacker became Mrs. Proudie's brow, but that such blackness was not injurious to her own cause. When Mr. Slope was at Puddingdale Vicarage that morning, she had regarded him as the creature of the Lady Bishop. Now she perceived that they were enemies. She admitted her mistake to herself without any pain or humiliation. She had but one feeling, and that was confined to her family. She cared little how she twisted and turned among these newcomers at the bishop's palace, so long as she could twist her husband into the warden's house. She cared not which was her friend or which was her enemy, if only she could get this preferment which she so sorely wanted. She told her tale, and Mrs. Proudie listened to it, almost in silence. She told how Mr. Slope had cozened her husband into resigning his claim, and had declared that it was the bishop's will that none but Mr. Harding should be warden. Mrs. Proudie's brow became blacker and blacker. At last she started from her chair, and, begging Mrs. Quiverful to sit and wait for her return, marched out of the room. "Oh, Mrs. Proudie, it's for 14 children, for 14 children!" Such was the burden that fell on her ear as she closed the door behind her. Chapter 26. Mrs. Proudie wrestles and gets a fall. It was hardly an hour since Mrs. Proudie had left her husband's apartment victorious, and yet so indomitable. And yet so indomitable was her courage that she now returned thither, panting for another combat. She was greatly angry with what she thought was his duplicity. He had so clearly given her a promise on this matter of the hospital. He had been already so absolutely vanquished on that point. Mrs. Proudie began to feel that if every affair was to be thus discussed and battled about twice or even thrice, the work of the diocese would be too much even for her. Without knocking at the door, she walked quickly into her husband's room and found him seated at his office table, with Mr. Slope opposite to him. Between his fingers was the very note which he had written to the Archbishop in her presence, and it was open. Yes, he had absolutely violated the seal which had been made sacred by her approval. They were sitting in deep conclave, and it was too clear that the purport of the Archbishop's invitation had been absolutely canvassed again, after it had been already debated and decided on in obedience to her behests. Mr. Slope rose from his chair and bowed slightly. The two opposing spirits looked each other fully in the face, and they knew that they were looking each at an enemy. "What is this, Bishop, about Mr. Quiverful?" said she, coming to the end of the table and standing there. Mr. Slope did not allow the Bishop to answer, but replied himself, "I have been out to Puddingdale this morning, ma'am, and have seen Mr. Quiverful. Mr. Quiverful has abandoned his claim to the hospital because he is now aware that Mr. Harding is desirous to fill his old place. Under these circumstances, I have strongly advised his lordship to nominate Mr. Harding." "Mr. Quiverful has not abandoned anything," said the lady, with a very imperious voice. "His lordship's word has been pledged to him, and it must be respected." The bishop still remained silent. He was anxiously desirous of making his old enemy bite the dust beneath his feet. His new ally had told him that nothing was more easy for him than to do so. The ally was there now at his elbow to help him, and yet his courage failed him. It is so hard to conquer when the prestige of former victories is all against one. It is so hard for the cock who has once been beaten out of his yard to resume his courage and again take a proud place upon a dunghill. "Perhaps I ought not to interfere," said Mr. Slope, "but yet—" "Certainly ought not," said the infuriated dame. "But yet," continued Mr. Slope, not regarding the interruption, "I have thought it my imperative duty to recommend the bishop not to slight Mr. Harding's claims." "Mr. Harding should have known his own mind," said the lady. "If Mr. Harding be not replaced at the hospital, his lordship will have to encounter much ill will, not only in the diocese but in the world at large. Besides, taking a higher ground, his lordship, as I understand, feels it to be his duty to gratify, in this matter, so very worthy a man and so good a clergyman as Mr. Harding." "And what is to become of the Sabbath day school and of the Sunday services in the hospital?" said Mrs. Proudie, with something very nearly approaching a sneer on her face. "I understand that Mr. Harding makes no objection to the Sabbath day school," said Mr. Slope. "And as to the hospital services, that matter will be best discussed after his appointment. If he has any permanent objection, then I fear the matter must rest." "You have a very easy conscience in such matters, Mr. Slope," said she. "I should not have an easy conscience," he rejoined, "but a conscience very far from being easy, if anything said or done by me should lead the bishop to act unadvisedly in this matter. It is clear that in the interview I had with Mr. Harding I misunderstood him." "And is it equally clear that you have misunderstood Mr. Quiverful?" "And it is equally clear that you have misunderstood Mr. Quiverful," said she, now at the top of her wrath. "What business have you at all with these interviews? Who desired you to go to Mr. Quiverful this morning? Who commissioned you to manage this affair? Will you answer me, sir? Who sent you to Mr. Quiverful this morning?" There was a dead pause in the room. Mr. Slope had risen from his chair and was standing with his hand on the back of it, looking at first very solemn and now very black. Mrs. Proudie was standing as she had at first placed herself, at the end of the table, and as she interrogated her foe she struck her hand upon it with almost more than feminine vigour. The bishop was sitting in his easy-chair, twiddling his thumbs, turning his eyes now to his wife and now to his chaplain as each took up the cudgels. How comfortable it would be if they could fight it out between them without the necessity of any interference on his part, fight it out so that one should kill the other utterly, as far as diocesan life was concerned, so that he, the bishop, might know clearly by whom it behoved him to be led. There would be the comfort of quiet in either case. But if the bishop had a wish as to which might prove the victor, that wish was certainly not antagonistic to Mr. Slope. Better the damn you know than the damn you don't know is an old saying, and perhaps a true one, but the bishop had not yet realised the truth of it. "Will you answer me, sir?" she repeated. "Who instructed you to call on Mr. Quiverful this morning?" There was another pause. "Do you intend to answer me, sir?" "I think, Mrs. Proudie, that under all the circumstances it will be better for me not to answer such a question," said Mr. Slope. Mr. Slope had many tones in his voice, all duly under his command. Among them was a sanctified low tone and a sanctified loud tone, and he now used the former. "Did anyone send you, sir?" "Mrs. Proudie," said Mr. Slope, "I am quite aware how much I owe to your kindness. I am aware also what is due by courtesy from a gentleman to a lady. But there are higher considerations than either of those, and I hope I shall be forgiven if I now allow myself to be actuated solely by them. My duty in this matter is to his lordship, and I can admit of no questioning but from him. He has approved of what I have done, and you must excuse me if I say that, having that approval and my own, I want no other." What horrid words were these which greeted the ear of Mrs. Proudie? The matter was indeed too clear. There was premeditated mutiny in the camp. Not only had ill-conditioned minds become insubordinate by the fruition of a little power, but sedition had been overtly taught and preached. The bishop had not yet been 12 months in his chair, and rebellion had already reared her hideous head within the palace. Anarchy and misrule would quickly follow, unless she took immediate and strong measures to put down the conspiracy which she had detected. "Mr. Slope," said she, with slow and dignified voice, differing much from that which she had hitherto used, "Mr. Slope, I will trouble you, if you please, to leave the apartment. I wish to speak to my lord alone." Mr. Slope also felt that everything depended on the present interview. Should the bishop now be re-petticoated, his thraldom would be complete and for ever. This present moment was peculiarly propitious for rebellion. The bishop had clearly committed himself by breaking the seal of the answer to the archbishop. He had therefore fear to influence him. Mr. Slope had told him that no consideration ought to induce him to refuse the archbishop's invitation. He had therefore hope to influence him. He had accepted Mr. Quiverful's resignation, and therefore dreaded having to renew that matter with his wife. He had been screwed up to the pitch of asserting a will of his own, and might possibly be carried on till by an absolute success he should have been taught how possible it was to succeed. Now was the moment for victory or rout. It was now that Mr. Slope must make himself master of the diocese, or else resign his place and begin his search for fortune again. He saw all this plainly. After what had taken place, any compromise between him and the lady was impossible. Let him once leave the room at her bidding, and leave the bishop in her hands, and he might at once pack up his portmanteau and bid adieu to episcopal honours, Mrs. Bold, and the Signora Neroni. And yet it was not so easy to keep his ground when he was bidden by a lady to go, or to continue to make a third in a party between a husband and wife, when the wife expressed a wish for a tête-à-tête with her husband. "Mr. Slope," she repeated, "I wish to be alone with my lord." "His lordship has summoned me on most important diocesan business," said Mr. Slope, glancing with uneasy eye at Dr. Proudie. He felt that he must trust something to the bishop, and yet that trust was so woefully ill-placed. "My leaving him at the present moment is, I fear, impossible." "Do you bandy words with me, you ungrateful man?" said she. "My lord, will you do me the favour to beg Mr. Slope to leave the room?" My lord scratched his head, but for the moment said nothing. This was as much as Mr. Slope expected from him, and was, on the whole, for him, an active exercise of marital rights. "My lord," said the lady, "is Mr. Slope to leave this room, or am I?" Here Mrs. Proudie made a false step. She should not have alluded to the possibility of retreat on her part. She should not have expressed the idea that her order for Mr. Slope's expulsion could be treated otherwise than by immediate obedience. In answer to such a question, the bishop naturally said in his own mind that it was necessary that one should leave the room. Perhaps it might be as well that Mrs. Proudie did so. He did say so in his own mind, but externally he again scratched his head and again twiddled his thumbs. Mrs. Proudie was boiling over with wrath. Alas, alas, could she but have kept her temper as her enemy did, she would have conquered as she had ever conquered. But divine anger got the better of her, as it has done of other heroines, and she fell. "My lord," said she, "am I to be vouchsafed an answer, or am I not?" At last he broke his deep silence, and proclaimed himself a Slopeite. "Why, my dear," said he, "Mr. Slope and I are very busy." That was all. There was nothing more necessary. He had gone to the battlefield, stood the dust and heat of the day, encountered the fury of the foe, and won the victory. How easy is success to those who will only be true to themselves. Mr. Slope saw at once the full amount of his gain, and turned on the vanquished lady a look of triumph which she never forgot and never forgave. Here he was wrong. He should have looked humbly at her, and with meek, entreating eye have deprecated her anger. He should have said by his glance that he asked pardon for his success, and that he hoped forgiveness for the stand which he had been forced to make in the cause of duty. So might he perchance have somewhat mollified that imperious bosom, and prepared the way for future terms. But Mr. Slope meant to rule without terms. Ah, forgetful, inexperienced man! Can you cause that little trembling victim to be divorced from the woman that possesses him? Can you provide that they shall be separated at bed and board? Is he not flesh of her flesh and bone of her bone, and must he not so continue? It is very well now for you to stand your ground and triumph as she is driven ignominiously from the room. But can you be present when those curtains are drawn, when that awful helmet of proof has been tied beneath the chin, when the small remnants of the bishop's prowess shall be cowed by the tassel above his head? Can you then intrude yourself when the wife wishes to speak to my lord alone? But for the moment Mr. Slope's triumph was complete, for Mrs. Proudie, without further parley, left the room, and did not forget to shut the door after her. Then followed a close conference between the new allies, in which was said much which it astonished Mr. Slope to say and the bishop to hear. And yet the one said it, and the other heard it without ill will. There was no mincing of matters now. The chaplain plainly told the bishop that the world gave him credit for being under the governance of his wife, that his credit and character in the diocese was suffering, that he would surely get himself into hot water if he allowed Mrs. Proudie to interfere in matters which were not suitable for a woman's powers, and in fact that he would become contemptible if he did not throw off the yoke under which he groaned. The bishop at first hummed and hawed, and affected to deny the truth of what was said. But his denial was not stout, and quickly broke down. He soon admitted by silence his state of vassalage, and pledged himself, with Mr. Slope's assistance, to change his courses. Mr. Slope also did not make out a bad case for himself. He explained how it grieved him to run counter to a lady who had always been his patroness, who had befriended him in so many ways, who had, in fact, recommended him to the bishop's notice. But, as he stated, his duty was now imperative. He held a situation of peculiar confidence, and was immediately and especially attached to the bishop's person. In such a situation, his conscience required that he should regard solely the bishop's interests, and therefore he had ventured to speak out. The bishop took this for what it was worth, and Mr. Slope only intended that he should do so. It gilded the pill which Mr. Slope had to administer, and which the bishop thought would be less bitter than that other pill which he had so long been taking. My lord had his immediate reward, like a good child. He was instructed to write, and at once did write another note to the Archbishop, accepting his Grace's invitation. This note Mr. Slope, more prudent than the lady, himself took away and posted with his own hands. Thus he made sure that this act of self-jurisdiction should be as nearly as possible a fait accompli. He begged and coaxed and threatened that bishop with a view of making him also write at once to Mr. Harding. But the bishop, though temporarily emancipated from his wife, was not yet enthralled to Mr. Slope. He said, and probably said truly, that such an offer must be made in some official form, that he was not yet prepared to sign the form, and that he should prefer seeing Mr. Harding before he did so. Mr. Slope might, however, beg Mr. Harding to call upon him. Not disappointed with his achievement, Mr. Slope went his way. He first posted the precious note which he had in his pocket, and then pursued other enterprises in which we must follow him in other chapters. Mrs. Proudie, having received such satisfaction as was to be derived from slamming her husband's door, did not at once betake herself to Mrs. Quiverful. Indeed, for the first few moments after her repulse, she felt that she could not again see that lady. She would have to own that she had been beaten, to confess that the diadem had passed from her brow and the sceptre from her hand. No, she would send a message to her, with the promise of a letter on the next day or the day after. Thus resolving, she betook herself to her bedroom, but here again she changed her mind. The air of that sacred enclosure somewhat restored her courage and gave her more heart. As Achilles warmed at the sight of his armour, as Don Quixote's heart grew strong when he grasped his lance, so did Mrs. Proudie look forward to fresh laurels as her eye fell on her husband's pillow. She would not despair. Having so resolved, she descended with dignified mien and refreshed countenance to Mrs. Quiverful. This scene in the bishop's study took longer in the acting than in the telling. We have not, perhaps, had the whole of the conversation. At any rate, Mrs. Quiverful was beginning to be very impatient, and was thinking that Farmer Subsoil would be tired of waiting for her, when Mrs. Proudie returned. Oh, who can tell the palpitations of that maternal heart as the supplicant looked into the face of the great lady, to see written there either a promise of house, income, comfort, and future competence, or else the doom of continued and ever-increasing poverty. Poor mother, poor wife, there was little there to comfort you. Mrs. Quiverful. Thus spoke the lady with considerable austerity, and without sitting down herself. I find that your husband has behaved in this matter in a very weak and foolish manner. Mrs. Quiverful immediately rose upon her feet, thinking it disrespectful to remain sitting while the wife of the bishop stood. But she was desired to sit down again, and made to do so that Mrs. Proudie might stand and preach over her. It is generally considered an offensive thing for a gentleman to keep his seat while another is kept standing before him, and we presume the same law holds with regard to ladies. It is often so felt, but we are inclined to say that it never produces half the discomfort or half the feeling of implied inferiority that is shown by a great man who desires his visitor to be seated while he himself speaks from his legs. Such a solecism in good breeding, when construed into English, means this: the accepted rules of courtesy in the world require that I should offer you a seat. If I did not do so, you would bring a charge against me in the world of being arrogant and ill-mannered. I will obey the world, but nevertheless I will not put myself on an equality with you. You may sit down, but I won't sit with you. Sit, therefore, at my bidding, and I'll stand and talk at you. This was just what Mrs. Proudie meant to say, and Mrs. Quiverful, though she was too anxious and too flurried thus to translate the full meaning of the manoeuvre, did not fail to feel its effect. She was cowed and uncomfortable, and a second time essayed to rise from her chair. "Pray be seated, Mrs. Quiverful. Pray keep your seat. Your husband, I say, has been most weak and most foolish. It is impossible, Mrs. Quiverful, to help people who will not help themselves. I much fear that I can now do nothing for you in this matter." "Oh, Mrs. Proudie, don't say so," said the poor woman, again jumping up. "Pray be seated, Mrs. Quiverful. I much fear that I can do nothing further for you in this matter. Your husband has, in a most unaccountable manner, taken upon himself to resign that which I was empowered to offer him. As a matter of course, the bishop expects that his clergy shall know their own minds. What he may ultimately do, what we may finally decide on doing, I cannot now say. Knowing the extent of your family— 14 children, Mrs. Proudie, 14 of them, and barely bred. It's hard for the children of a clergyman. It's hard for one who has always done his duty respectably." Not a word fell from her about herself, but the tears came streaming down her big coarse cheeks, on which the dust of the August road had left its traces. Mrs. Proudie has not been portrayed in these pages as an agreeable or an amiable lady. There has been no intention to impress the reader much in her favour. It is ordained that all novels should have a male and a female angel and a male and a female devil. If it be considered that this rule is obeyed in these pages, the latter character must be supposed to have fallen to the lot of Mrs. Proudie. But she was not all devil. There was a heart inside that stiff-ribbed bodice, though not perhaps of large dimensions, and certainly not easily accessible. Mrs. Quiverful, however, did gain access, and Mrs. Proudie proved herself a woman. Whether it was the 14 children with their probable bare bread and their possible bare backs, or the respectability of the father's work, or the mingled dust and tears on the mother's face, we will not pretend to say. But Mrs. Proudie was touched. She did not show it as other women might have done. She did not give Mrs. Quiverful eau de cologne, or order her a glass of wine. She did not take her to her toilet table and offer her the use of brushes and combs, towels and water. She did not say soft little speeches and coax her kindly back to equanimity. Mrs. Quiverful, despite her rough appearance, would have been as amenable to such little tender cares as any lady in the land, but none such were forthcoming. Instead of this, Mrs. Proudie slapped one hand upon the other and declared, not with an oath, for as a lady and a Sabbatarian and a she-bishop she could not swear, but with an adjuration that she wouldn't have it done. The meaning of this was that she wouldn't have Mr. Quiverful's promised appointment cozened away by the treachery of Mr. Slope and the weakness of her husband. This meaning she very soon explained to Mrs. Quiverful. "Why was your husband such a fool," said she, now dismounted from her high horse and sitting confidentially down close to her visitor, "as to take the bait which that man threw to him? If he had not been so utterly foolish, nothing could have prevented your going to the hospital." Poor Mrs. Quiverful was ready enough with her own tongue in accusing her husband to his face of being soft, and perhaps did not always speak of him to her children quite so respectfully as she might have done, but she did not at all like to hear him abused by others, and began to vindicate him, and to explain that of course he had taken Mr. Slope to be an emissary from Mrs. Proudie herself, that Mr. Slope was thought to be peculiarly her friend, and that, therefore, Mr. Quiverful would have been failing in respect to her had he assumed to doubt what Mr. Slope had said. Thus mollified, Mrs. Proudie again declared that she would not have it done, and at last sent Mrs. Quiverful home with an assurance that, to the furthest stretch of her power and influence in the palace, the appointment of Mr. Quiverful should be insisted on. As she repeated the word insisted, she thought of the bishop in his nightcap, and with compressed lips slightly shook her head. "Oh, my aspiring pastors, divines to whose ears nolo episcopari are the sweetest of words, which of you would be a bishop on such terms as these?" Mrs. Quiverful got home in the farmer's cart, not, indeed, with a light heart, but satisfied that she had done right in making her visit. And that is where we shall end for tonight. Thank you for listening. Oh, it's getting tense. We've got outright war. Proudie versus Slope. Who will win? My money is not on either of them at the moment, because I think they're kind of equally matched. But yes, excuse me. Yeah, I hope we all enjoyed. I certainly did. It is fun. And some of the names here, some of the names are so good. There's farmers, Mr. Styles, Mr. Greenacre, and Mr. Subsoil. And then what was the like the footman's name? Mr. something Puff. It's just no Puff Futz or Futz Puff or something like that. Fitzpuff, that was it. Fitzpuff. It's like such good names. They're so silly. But yes, a verbal fight to the death, exactly. But yes, thank you all very much for being here. I shall see if Stephen is around to raid over to. He is! Oh, he's on Blueprints again. So, I'm going to throw you all over to Stephen. For people who are playing Blueprints at the moment, Blueprints at the moment, warning, spoilers. But yeah. I shall send you all over there. In theory, Sam should be back on Saturday with some stories of some description. But yes, until then, I hope you all have, a good rest of your week. Go take care of yourselves and people around you. And yeah, we shall see you again very soon. Thank you and good night.